All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Actual Anarchy podcast. The podcast brought to you by the fine folks at readrothbard.com and actualanarchy.com. And today is a very special show. We're going to be talking about Dazed and Confused with a very special guest. But first, let's say hello to Robert. How you doing, Robert?
What's up, everybody? Doing great, living life, loving it. How you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing well, man. Wide awake, bushy-tailed. Got up at 5:30 in the morning today with the kids. And from our pre-show talk, I think you got up a little later than that, but no problem at all.
Yeah, no, I'll do my best. Who knows? I'm still kind of fuzzy, but I'm excited to do this movie, and we got a great guest on, so let's do this.
All right, well, before we get going, I just want to mention to everyone that we're working on a super special secret project that our Patreon subscribers will have access to first dibs on, and it's going to be called the Rothbard Repository. I'll tell you more about it on future shows, but just know that it's a ton of work, but I think it's going to be a really fun, cool thing to have, and just a little teaser for now. But up next, let's introduce our guest. Robert, why don't you break it down who he is, and then we'll give him the floor for a few minutes.
Yeah, you probably know, if you're into like libertarianism, libertarian podcasts at all, you know this guy. He's on, up until recently, he was a big part of the Problem, the Dave Smith podcast. And he has his own podcast called Mikeadelic. It's the one and only Mike Brancatelli. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Feeling refreshed, full of energy and life, ready to do this thing over here on the Eastern time zone. And yeah, good to connect with you guys. Good to be on a podcast with a couple of people that are devoted to Rothbardianism, as we like to say, and the anarchist philosophy. So good to be here. And yeah, just right now, I'm kind of focusing on this podcast, like you mentioned. I was part of the Problem. Now I'm doing Mikeadelic, and that's pretty much what I got going on. I'm just kind of trying to focus on making that show as awesome as it possibly can be, and doing that. So I put out a show a week and try and book guests and talk about all things psychedelic and anarchist as well.
Yeah, I definitely recommend checking that out. I'm surprised, I guess you just get into this movement and you find people and they find you. I mean, we've found, we've got this, like Indian professor guy writing for us now. He's writing some amazing things. You put yourself out there, and I guess you find good people. I live in this kind of, barren wasteland of socialism, but, thanks to the modern world and the technology that we live in, yeah, you can find like-minded people. It's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, me and you both. I mean, I'm in New York, so it's like, such a blue state here, and just dem socialists everywhere you see. It's like walking down the street in New York City is like the video game Doom. You gotta there's just like there's not a lot of libertarians and anarchists around, so you got to find them, put your voice out there and connect. And glad to be connecting with you guys today.
Fantastic. Well, the movie we're talking about is Dazed and Confused. It's a 1993 comedy by good old Richard Linklater, who also did Scanner Darkly, School of Rock, Boyhood, Waking Life. And this is a movie, I mean, to date me, this is a movie this is right around the time I was graduating high school. So, when the soundtrack came out, this is, you bought the CD, and this is like and reliving this movie, I hadn't seen it probably in 20 years. And it's probably been stated a million times, but the soundtrack really is amazing. Just every song that comes on really fits the vibe and the theme of the movie. But if anybody, Daniel, if you have any like other kind of opening like statements or anything you want to make before we get into the like scene by scene analysis? It's like it follows like everybody, like a group of high schoolers on their last day of school, and that's about the entire plot of the movie. There's a lot of things that happen, and we'll definitely get into it. But Daniel, you have any opening comments?
I certainly do. Yeah, I'm just going to read the Google description, which I don't think is quite accurate, but it's here and might as well, right? So this coming-of-age film follows the mayhem of a group of rowdy teenagers in Austin, Texas, celebrating the last day of high school in 1976, the bicentennial year of the United States of America. The graduating class heads for a popular pool hall and joins an impromptu keg party. However, the star football player, Randall Pink Floyd, played by Jason London, has promised to focus on the championship game and abstain from partying. Meanwhile, the incoming freshmen try to avoid being hazed by the seniors, most notably the sadistic bully Fred O'Banion, played by Ben Affleck. And that's all it says, which I don't know if that's entirely accurate. I know when I was watching the film for the first time, 20 years ago, I don't know if I was really following it as closely to really understand what the plot was, and watching it again just the other day, I still don't really think there's much of a plot. It's just sort of like, it's almost a documentary. They're just following people around for about a day, and you kind of see some different, snippets of different cliques and groups and instances of high school that they're sort of, sort of glorifying in a way. But I still think it has some interesting concepts to talk about. And just for our fans who enjoy the Rotten Tomatoes ratings that we mentioned, this one got a 94%, so people are big fans of this.
Yeah, at what point does Randall, Pink Floyd, doesn't want to party and he's promised to focus on the championship game? What? That doesn't happen at all in the movie that I recall.
No, not at all. I think he's talking about, playing the next season, and they're going to have a good team, and so they're going to focus on being the best team they can be. But the coach wants them to sign this contract, basically a guilt trip contract that says they're not going to be promiscuous, chasing the muff around, or do any drinking or drugs, so they can be a good team, and then maybe win a championship the next year. But yeah, this description here doesn't really lay that out correctly.
Yeah, definitely not. So speaking of that pledge, so this, for me, this is this is a voluntary organization, right? I mean, we're talking about a quasi non-voluntary situation in public high school where sometimes it's voluntary and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the punishment is more school. Sometimes it's less school. But in Anarchy-capitalism, if this is a voluntary organization where, say, hey, we're the guys that beat you up when you enter, I have no problem with that, right? You're voluntary entering, and this is the rules, and that's going to be a great signal for people about whether they want to join you or not. So things like the UFC or professional football, it's basically organized voluntary violence, and it's perfectly fine. But, and this is where it kind of gets sticky, is, I guess not for me sticky, because you can not play high school football if you don't want to. But you are kind of forced to go to school. So did either of you guys have an issue with this pledge, or did you see it as, I don't know, just like some sort of a voluntary thing?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a voluntary thing, because I think the movie's trying to, it's playing on his split between, he wants to just hang out and party versus, make a commitment to do something. But yeah, you're forced to be in school, and I guess while you're there, you have the voluntary option to participate in extracurricular activities. And so if you choose to participate in those activities, and there's some sort of, agreement that needs to be made in order for you to participate, then I think that's full on voluntary. It's I don't have a problem with that, really.
Well, I'd add to that he'd been playing for a few years already and not had to sign such a pledge. So this was like a new piece introduced to something he was already doing, and now they're changing the rules of the game. And so I'd argue that he'd homesteaded the ability to play on that team without signing such a contract.
But it's still a voluntary organization, Daniel. They can change the rules of the game. They change the rules of football all the time.
That is true.
Now, did Adam Goldberg's character, he plays Mike Newhouse, I believe, he calls it neo-McCarthyism. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. Possibly. I mean, I guess if he sees the neo-McCarthyism as being like, some kind of authoritarian crackdown. Usually when I hear McCarthyism, I hear like, I automatically think of, kind of a fear or, over hyping some kind of, threat or something like that. But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would maybe side with that guy because that guy seems to be kind of smart in the movie. He kind of knows what's going on. So I like that character.
He seems smart, so I'll agree.
And yeah, they are kind of trying to find the drug doers and root out those kind of people. But anyway, any more on that before we move on?
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, I obviously, I would have to interject with this piece about the drug doers and things like that because it's kind of like, we have these rules that the football wants, or the schools and football, of course, but the war on drugs was a new thing. So there was a big like backlash to that. And I think a lot of people were probably a little ticked off that they couldn't participate in the things that they wanted to do and also do other things that they wanted to do. And, see it as a kind of infringement on their rights, so to speak. But, I guess you're dealing with kids here too. So then there's also that element that's a little iffy, but.
Yeah. I mean, they've got, I don't know, do you follow the UFC, Mike?
Yeah. I know about some policies with weed and stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
So a guy will smoke some weed in between fights and then he'll get banned for like years. And they argue that it's a performance-enhancing drug. And, I mean, they're a voluntary organization, I guess. Quasi, I suppose. I mean, they're voluntary, but can you just, when they ban you, it almost like forces you to go fight, overseas and that sort of thing. And they'll just hand down the most strict things for, how could you really argue that some guy smokes weed after a fight to help recover and recuperate and to like dull the pain or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're an adult. I don't know. It gets into some gray areas, I suppose, but.
Happy birthday to the ground. That's what I think of when you say I'm an adult.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. To your point about it being voluntary, I think it is voluntary to a degree, but because there are state licensing boards about whether they can fight or not, whether they're authorized to hold events in certain states, or like the NFL even, it's a big daddy government protected racket. It's a cartel arrangement that really doesn't provide any alternatives. So a player is kind of beholden to this cartel arrangement, and it's the absence of alternatives that I think makes it a little bit less voluntary than would otherwise be. And to pull my former leftism into this mix, I'd say that there's a power differential, and that the ones holding the power have it illegitimately, and thus it kind of makes it less than voluntary.
Yeah, it's a tough one. They're somewhat illegitimately because they use the power of government to maintain like a quasi-monopoly somewhat. Because they well, at least not, if not monopoly, at least an advantage, an unfair, I guess if you could say unfair advantage, because you're using like taxpayer funds to build your stadiums and taking all that crap, whereas some kind of fresh new upstart like the XFL by Jim McMahon wouldn't necessarily have all those advantages. So even though it's technically, free competition, not really, because you have this government backing advantage, which is obviously funded by theft. So I see your point.
Well, all right. So if we can move on to the next thing I just wanted to bring up. This was set in 1976, and so they play up the bicentennial a little bit. And one of the teachers, as the class is letting out, says, hey, remember this whole thing while you're out celebrating is all because some aristocratic slave-owning white men didn't want to pay their taxes.
Yes.
As if that was the only problem.
Right.
That kind of mentality kind of demonizes those who don't want to pay as much of taxes, even though, back then it was like something akin to 3%, versus now it's, 40 or 50%, depending on how you calculate it. So it's a way of like downplaying that taxes are even bad to begin with. And to have a teacher telling that to students, I mean, I guess that's just par for the course, right? Like, if the state is in charge of education, what do you think the education's going to be about how great the state is?
Definitely.
Yeah, that always struck me as like that seems to be the same through line, like even till today with these social justice warriors. It's like, it's all about paying your fair share. If somebody doesn't pay their taxes, it's seen as like a bad thing. It's like, this kind of contributing to everything, and whereas obviously our views and my view is that taxation is theft, and yeah, that's a pretty goddamn reason, a good reason to start a revolution.
Yeah, and it's like these leftists, they have no understanding of what is actually doing good for society overall. I mean, it's entrepreneurs going out creating projects or products and services that make everyone's lives better at lower prices and higher quality. That does a material increase in the standard of living. But taxes is just a waste. It's taken from people against their will. I mean, some people, I guess, willingly pay. And there's nothing stopping them from paying more, by the way. And I'll put a link down below where you can volunteer more money to government if you guys wish. But if we learn anything from Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, it's that people will have fewer options if the money is taken away from them. Like, they would have gone one more level down on their value scale, on their preference scale, if they had more money. But because it's taken from them, they no longer have that option, and it's necessarily put into something they wouldn't otherwise have chosen, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be coercive, it wouldn't be theft, it wouldn't be a legal problem if you don't pay. And it goes towards boondoggles, it goes towards the bureaucratic process that is all about growing budgets for next year, getting more of a what would you call it, like a little fiefdom, like each little department wants to grow their head count and grow their reach of their power and all of these things, and that's the exact opposite of the market mechanism. And so we see that going on even in this film, where they have at the end of the movie they go to this moon tower, and apparently that was built as some sort of a boondoggle from government, and they're like, they don't even know why it's there, but it is there, and it hasn't been maintained in years, and they make a joke about some kid falling down who had one beer, and oh look, there's his blood on every beam all the way down this thing.
Yeah, I feel like every little town has some kind of government boondoggle, some kind of old, just bunch of waste, taxpayer wasted money, some thing sitting around, in every little sleepy town in America.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the pork, man. That's what gets everyone voting for more stuff.
Yeah.
Right, because there's this big pie, and you want a bigger and bigger piece of it for you and yours, because that'll get you reelected, and it's just an entire vampire squid system. It's horrific, and how statists can support it only through emotional indoctrination.
And it is quite strong. I mean, it does take quite a bit of inertia to break away from it. I was lucky. We mentioned this on a previous show, but with the dislocation in the markets in 2007, 2008, I was already questioning things, and then you start hearing about Ron Paul, and you just start figuring this stuff out, and it becomes crystal clear. Like, you can look out on the world and see it so much easier now with a principled approach and a lens with which to view things.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It really is, like, once you get the understanding down that there's just, that there's a nature to what the state is, and that nature is based upon force and coercion. Once you understand that that's their built-in operating system, yeah, everything you see everything with such clarity and simplicity after that. It's like, it's like a whole new world. But yeah, I could see how it could be kind of challenging for a lot of people to break from that mold. Well, one thing that's always interesting that we see is that, whenever government fails, right, they always get more money and they never succeed. So they always keep failing and getting more money. So growing their, as you said before.
Rewarded for failure. So,
right.
Yeah, they don't have any reason to improve. But the point you just made a moment ago, where once you kind of have an understanding and I'll just say, libertarianism and Austrian economics really gives you a model through which you can see things more clearly. Related to one of your recent episodes on your show where you're talking about Mental Awareness Month, May being mental awareness or mental illness, I've always thought that one of the contributors to mental illness is the fact that people look out at the world and it's confusing. And, black is white, everything's the opposite. It's like very Orwellian. Like hitting people is bad, stealing is bad, but the government does it and it's fine. And I think that people can't quite put their finger on it. And so it lends to feeling a sense of hopelessness. And, there's so many restrictions on what you can even do with your own body, like starting a business, driving a car, you name it. The government's going to be involved in so many little aspects of your life. And I know for me personally, it's limited what I've been willing to do as an entrepreneur. Like I've thought about, starting various businesses over the years, and I always run into, well, I need this license and that license and this registration and this other thing over here. So I guess what I'm sort of convolutedly saying is that I think that mental illness is contributed by the culture or the society that a state creates, because it doesn't line up with how humans interact. It doesn't line up with voluntarism. And so I only listened to half of that show before this call, so maybe you go into it a little bit more, but do you want to talk about that a little bit before we move on?
Yeah, I dive into it a little deeper in the rest of the show, and I'm working on this thing. I guess you could call it a theory. I don't know what it is, but it's just something I'm working on, like where the state distorts. It distorts everything. Once you introduce the notion of legitimized or perceived legitimate authority and the right to use force, that then sets the precedent, which lets like a domino effect flow down the hierarchical chart of organizations. So now everybody aspires to be like the rule setters, the game setters, the state in this case, because they're the ones with threatening violence and using guns and forcing people to do things. So that distorts the entire spectrum of things. That has effects on corporations and businesses. It has effects on everyone. It has effects on people's behavior. So now behavior is rewarded for being most like the state. If you're duplicitous, malicious, and deceitful, you're rewarded because that's how the state is. And so it does distort this natural human flow, and I do feel like people are conflicted. I sure was and am for a certain degree. And you're conflicted because you want to put value into the world and contribute to society, but a lot of what the state brings in just by its mere presence is a distortion of that natural flow of human free voluntary interaction. And I'll just say that I think it totally contributes to mental, what we call mental illness. And one of the things I love about Dazed and Confused is it's set in 1976, where there was much less rules and regulations. So a better kind of environment, I think.
Right, and a corollary to that is that the potency of the drugs was also much less, because in response to all the additional regulations and illegality of it, things have needed to become more potent to make it worthwhile, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's one of those things where once you're forced to hide from the authority figures who are pointing guns at you, you have to do things in a little bit of a different way. So you never know what you're going to get in terms of drugs being, things mixed with chemicals that you don't want to put in your body. So it's much better to do these kinds of things on the up and up, like free human beings should be allowed to do, exchanging goods and services that we actually want, and not having to hide and and enter into black markets.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what the market does, right? The market reduces costs and improves quality. So
Right.
if this was just left to the market without all the running around and not being able to use the courts as a means to resolve disputes and all the other things associated with black market, we would just you'd be able to go down to the corner drugstore or whatever, or order on Silk Road, which is criminal that guy's in jail.
Yeah.
And you could be assured that the quality is much higher, and you could see all the reviews, and it'd be like ordering on Amazon, and it would be and everybody knows how good Amazon is. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mike, and what you were describing about the worst rising to the top, that's the Hayekian insight regarding the political game that he spells out in The Road to Serfdom, and it lends itself to the most sadistic authoritarians who reach for that ring of power, to mix my movies and references and metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
So that lines me up to the next topic that we wanted to discuss, and that is the bullies going around hazing the freshman boys, going to paddle them. They're in woodshop making these paddles with holes in them, and it's called the soul pole and the fuck you. So Robert, you want to kick off this discussion?
I sure do. This is a big sticking point for me in this movie. It's interesting because, well, on many reasons, but in the very beginning, I know you had a point that the bullies get off school and they drive over to the middle school, and one of them pulls out this bullhorn, and he starts just broadcasting in front of everybody that he's going to promise to only beat you a little bit if you come out voluntarily, and then he's gonna if you make him work for it, then it's gonna be worse. You're gonna get a worse beating later.
It sounds like every election ever.
Right, like some sort of false political promise.
Right, yeah, it's the Walter Block. Baddie A promises to whip us only 3 times a week, where Baddie B says 5 times a week, and so you got to pick between the two, and he uses that as a justification for voting or at least supporting one candidate over another. But I look at both of them as a political promise that 99% of the time will not be followed through on. So I consider them both fucking liars, and think that beating is bad. So that's what this scene reminded me of, when they're promising one thing if you come out voluntarily. Well, we won't beat you that hard, but who's to say? How would you know? I'm sure
you're dealing with somebody who is instantly showing and telling you that, hey, I'm a thug, I'm going to use violence against you. So you already can tell that you can't trust this person to act honorably. So how could you take their word for anything they say or do? So yeah, you can't trust someone like that. That it's like if someone comes up and mugs you and promises to be nice. You can't. No. But it's interesting in the movie, right after he calls out on his bullhorn, the kids go up to the teacher, and the teacher is like this Vietnam War veteran, and they're like, hey, any minute, if you let us out, we might be able to escape these guys. It would be really cool if you'd let us go, let us go out of this prison. And he basically tells them no, because he had a tough time in Vietnam, and some of you guys are going to make it and other guys aren't. And then just how the indifference of the adults to this assault and violence just helps perpetuate it. Yes or no, Daniel?
Yeah, I agree. There was a lot of indifference. I think even the intellectual group makes note of that during the girl hazing, which I think you wanted to talk about the difference between the boys and the girls, how they're treated in this film. But yeah, it's amazing how people in this town just kind of allow this to happen. I'm sure it's illegal and it shouldn't be happening. Kids are getting beat up and harassed. But they're over here selling confessions.
And they're in this parking lot, and the big difference between. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Oh no. Well, I was just gonna say. I also I like that point that you made, because I remember that scene with the Vietnam veteran. He's like 50 of you going in the jungle, 25 of you ain't coming back. Like that was his line. But But that kind of illustrates the point that I'm making, like the Vietnam War. So many people were kidnapped and forced to go and murder people in a foreign land because the state decreed that was what was going on. So the state kind of distorts the natural flow of humanity and then causes this major distortion in the culture, which has a trickle-down effect where now this guy is basically like, hey, I got sent to Vietnam, I did some shit, so you kids are going to get paddled. That's really not that bad. They don't care. They let it go. It kind of becomes violence and force becomes a part of the culture.
Yeah, I have a great
point. Yeah.
That is a great point. And I have a good quote that lines up with this almost perfectly. I just posted it to our Twitter account yesterday. It's Aldous Huxley, and here's the quote. The most shocking fact about war is that its victims and its instruments are individual human beings, and that these individual human beings are condemned by the monstrous conventions of politics to murder or be murdered in quarrels not their own.
Yeah.
Sure.
Aldous Huxley.
Yeah, so this guy was a damaged psyche. He's got a damaged human being. So, yeah, if he hadn't have been subject to the kidnapping and forced violence that was in the war, maybe he would have been more sympathetic to our characters in this movie, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and another offshoot, we were talking about mental illness and damage caused by the state. I mean, just think of all the people who have gone to war and have come back. I mean, let alone the death and destruction that's perpetrated both on foreign people and then the people at home. But I think some astronomical amount of people who are veterans are committing suicide even today as a result of all of this.
22 a day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just madness.
Yeah.
And I don't mean in the mental illness way. I mean the fact that the state gets away with this, that what they do is not looked upon as being a bad thing, and the Joe Sixpack response is support our troops or wear like a yellow ribbon or something.
Right. Yeah. The use of tradition and patriotism is strong.
Yeah, and the cognitive dissonance, which must go on in everyone's mind, where it's, murder is bad, murder is wrong, you kill somebody, it's bad, but you do it for the state and it's good and celebrated and you're a hero and everyone's going to love you. That's gotta weigh on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Rob,
I wanted to talk about the differences in the treatment of the girls and the boys. In the movie, the girls, at one point, they're in the parking lot, and I think it was, I don't remember the names of the characters or whatever, but at one point, the senior girl is talking to a incoming freshman girl, and she's explaining kind of what's going to happen in this hazing ritual, and she asks her, are you in? Like, do you want to voluntarily join in on this activity? Whereas with the boys, there's like this hit squad that runs around, drives around, and just violently assaults people as they're trying to escape and get away. I don't necessarily have a whole lot of point to make other than that the disposable male in society is an issue. The fact that violence towards boys and men is very much seen as like this normal, okay thing. I guess like the incarceration rate and the punishment times for male perpetrators of the same crime versus women's is far greater. The conviction rates are far higher. And just the overall idea that men, it's okay to hit a guy and hit a boy, or it's just boys will be boys and they'll just attack each other and it's fine. Whereas girls are seen as, kind of off limits for that, which is good. But I don't really have, it's frustrating for me. I mean, I understand that you need, as a species, women, they're the baby makers. They're the life bringers. So you can have one man and 20 women and you'll be okay. But the disposable male, especially for an anarchist who believes in self-ownership, is just an abhorrent concept to me. Thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, equality, this big SJW movement for equality in everything. And,
right.
But of course they don't want equality in how, they're treated in the ways that you mentioned where men are mistreated more so than women. And really, any adjustment should be made in the opposite direction. Should be that men are also not drafted or treated poorly or lose all these court cases just because they have a penis. All of those things. And I think that the society or the general political process seems to be trending the other direction, where now they're celebrating the fact that women might be able to be drafted as well, as if that's such a great thing. Being conscripted into essentially slavery, into a military duty, which I think is definitely the wrong direction to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the main sticking point for me, and this is a big question, and I'd love to get everybody's response on this. The O'Banion character, played by Ben Affleck, is like the big villain, bully, piece of shit in the movie, where he's seen as this just a total dick. He runs around chasing after people and then really getting off on the sadistic violence, where he comes and assaults you. But for me, it's like he's the one that's playing it honestly, because he'll come out and he's just like an open dick. Everybody hates him. He's a piece of shit. He's a fucking piece of shit. But the other guys, so there's a scene where like the young kid is pitching in this baseball game, and O'Banion and a couple of his buddies are waiting in the stands to assault him after the game. And so O'Banion and his buddies are all beating the shit out of him. And then the main character, the Pink Floyd guy, he comes up afterwards, and he takes the paddle, and he kind of swats him, just barely touches him. And then he comes up and he says, hey, it'd be really cool if you came out and hung out with us later, because if you show that it wasn't a big deal and everything's cool, then it'll be like you're cool. And it really kind of just goes to psychologically, like, ingratiate yourself to your attackers, because if you come out and say that, yeah, it didn't really bother me that you assaulted me, then they didn't really commit a crime, because your victim is cool with what you did. So if you come out and hang out with us and party and whatever, then kind of absolves us of the assault. So the duplicitous ones, the kind of the Pink Floyd guy, I almost have a worse problem with him making this violence okay, because O'Banion's like opening piece of shit, obviously, about it, but at least he's honest. Whereas the other guys are working to normalize it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. I see exactly. I see what you're saying. And I think that, so I'm pretty sure that in the movie where the town there takes place, that it kind of has become this thing that is the way, like, it is normalized already. And I think that it's become this like long-standing tradition where it's like expected, like all the kids know. So it's kind of one of these like almost unwritten rule kind of things between the younger kids and the older kids, and it's where it's this like initiation, rite of passage kind of thing. But yeah, I think that the Pink Floyd guy, he's kind of just going with the flow, and he's kind of just playing to the tradition of what, you know, you're kind of supposed to do. Whereas the way that I see it is the O'Banion guy is like just really like playing it literally, like it's life or death, like it's his life, you know, which is sick, which is like a little sadistic. Where the other guys are just like, hey, this is like a thing we do, it's kind of tradition, you know, whatever. He seems to really like get off on it, and that's kind of scary.
Sure. And my thoughts on O'Banion was, you know, he's the kind of guy who later on becomes a cop or something.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I was kind of cheering when he tracks two of the kids down at their home, and their mom just like busts open and sticks a shotgun in his face. I mean, sure, it made O'Banion like almost, you know, get pissed about that and act like he was the victim later on. Like, did you hear that this lady pulled a shotgun on me? Can you imagine that? I was there in her front yard assaulting her children, and she like took offense to that. Can you believe it?
Yeah, when you put it like that, it's pretty hilarious. Yeah, and I really like that scene though, because it really does illustrate kind of an anarchist perspective, like, protecting yourself on your property. She's like, get the hell off my property, and she has a shotgun. And that's it. You know what I mean? There's no need to call the police, file a report, or do anything else. Nothing like that. You don't have to get the FBI. We don't have to install NSA stingrays and cameras everywhere. It's just, she's got a gun, he's got a paddle, get the hell out of here. That's how we handle our business.
I think if that were to happen today, though, then you would have police involvement, because I'm sure the O'Banion would have called the cop and been like, oh, she pulled a gun on me. And then a SWAT team shows up.
Right.
Oh, man. But, I do think that even though she was defending her kids, there was an awareness that this was not an assault with, like, deadly intent. I mean, I'm sure, the assault could have gone awry, but to come back with deadly defensive force might have been a little out of scale. What do you guys think on that?
I had zero problem with it. You've got a young, like, strong, like, in his prime 18-year-old male with a weapon in his hand. And you've got two kids and a woman defending their home. You don't know. I mean, yeah, there's a tradition in the school. You know what's going to happen generally. But you're also dealing with a psychopath that is, like, sadistic and getting off on this stuff. Yeah, your kid's probably not going to die. But, people have died from less things than getting smacked with a baseball bat, essentially.
Or a cricket
bat.
bat.
You think it was out of proportion?
No, I agree. I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this might be a good time to bring up, there's been some hazing stories in the news recently. Robert, you want to just touch on those?
Yeah, so at Penn State and in Upper New York, right around where Mike's from, there have been some much publicized hazing deaths. In the New York case, I believe is some guys who, like, punched and hit the victim. Whereas in the, Penn State situation, like, the guy drank a bunch of alcohol. And, in the news, the family is, of course, very much aggrieved, but they're treating it as if, their kid was the victim of, like, a violent assault. Like, they forced him to drink a bunch of alcohol and that sort of thing. Whereas I see it as, I mean, yeah, once you're kind of, like, involved in that social situation, yeah, there's some pressure to go along with it. This is a thing, but this is a thing you're voluntarily doing, and you're supposed to be the adult, and you're supposed to decide for yourself if you've had too much. They talk about how he was treated as roadkill because they put some, like, books, like a backpack on his back. Well, that's just to prevent you from rolling over. I mean, that's kind of what you're supposed to do. Yeah, they did take an extra long time before they brought him into, like, a hospital situation. But I'm sure everybody was fairly inebriated. I mean, I'm not trying to say that, it's not a tragedy when people die, of course. But they're probably going to be prosecuted for murder or accessory, like the kids in New York were. I think they're brought up on, like, manslaughter charges. And it really seems weird for me to say that, okay, we are a fraternity. We're an organization where there's kind of like this hazing ritual if you want to join. This is a voluntary thing that you want to join. This is what we do. We drink a lot, and sometimes things get a little crazy. And every once in a while, someone's going to die. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. There's going to be some pressure for you to probably drink a lot of alcohol, and you're probably not used to that yet, coming, like, straight from, high school maybe. You're not into that, and then you go to college, and then all of a sudden there's all this booze everywhere. I know that was like that for me. And you're not going to necessarily have the best understanding of, how much you can handle. But it is a completely voluntary thing. And to go then afterwards and say, man, I'm going to blame these other people for my bad decisions. Yeah, I've got an issue with that. Mike, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I agree with you too. It's like, when everybody knows what fraternities do, and especially, because you have fraternities and sororities, and they both kind of handle them differently. And actually, in the movie Dazed and Confused, that kind of those fraternity and sorority elements extend down to the high school. I remember, I never pledged a fraternity or anything, but I remember in high school I played on the football team, and there was a little bit of hazing, but it was nothing that was like super violent and stuff. And I think that if it was, I would have probably complained about it or something. But that's not really a fraternity. Fraternity is where you make the choice to enter into this thing where you know that there's going to be these kinds of situations that are going to be present, and that there's going to be kind of expectations to be put on you. So I think that it's kind of a shame. I mean, I think that at any point, you can kind of walk away and just say you don't want to be a part of this anymore. That's why I didn't do it. But I don't know. I mean, it is weird. Like there are going to be these kind of freak accidents, these things that happen. And obviously with men, there's this kind of like need to prove that you're the masculine and you're physical and you're dominant and you're stronger than everybody else and that sort of thing. It's this kind of macho alpha male kind of thing. And that can get a little carried away, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tricky. Yeah.
Where Robert and I went to college together, they actually outlawed or banned having fraternities as a result of this type of behavior. I'm not sure exactly like what the effects of that were. I mean, neither one of us like would have pledged, I don't believe. But they do have a point in the hazing ritual in that it brings people together on an emotional level. Like if you go through some shit together, you kind of form an emotional bond. And right or wrong, I mean, I think that's the reason that they do it.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, pledging a fraternity is a voluntary situation. But I did want to mention that, like, rookies in baseball, they're often hazed to a degree where they have to carry the bags, or the veteran players, or they have to dress as women, dress up in skirts and things like that. And that was in the news a couple of years ago because that was causing an SJW stir with the whole gender issue. And so now Major League Baseball has said, okay, we'll no longer allow this hazing of cross-dressing to occur because it offends people.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, it's just, that's so ridiculous. I mean, just because it offends some people. I mean, if it offends you, don't pay attention to it. Baseball is a male sport. Men play baseball. And you're right. It's like, that's what guys do to each other. Every relationship, I think, that I've ever, like, been in with a group of guys, like, making guy friends, there's always some kind of initiation that takes place. There's always some kind of ribbing or busting balls or, some kind of initiation process to see if you're kind of worthy to be associated with the people that you're hanging out with. There's a big spectrum, from just kind of making fun of people verbally to, assaulting people physically. But that's kind of what it is, at least for men. That's all I can really speak to about that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. There's always going to be a level of, hey, is this guy cool? And how you get about deciding that varies. But with the casual violence of the state toxifying and poisoning everyone's minds, who knows what the ANCAP world would be like? Would there be a whole bunch of hazing rituals and things like that? Maybe.
I've been wondering, I'm offended by the state and its actions. Why is that not a big deal?
Right, exactly. Yeah, we should all get together actually and do like social justice warriors do and make some kind of emotional I'm offended by the state video or something like that. I think that would be great. Like crying, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, they say Pledge of Allegiance. Actually, you're right, and I'm glad that you brought up that point about the state toxifying and whatnot, because these hazing rituals and this fraternity element kind of comes from the state. It comes from the military. When you join the military, there's that hazing aspect of it that happens. I mean, just boot camp, you could say, is just one big 8-long-week hazing event.
Yeah, it's to break you down. You're no longer an individual.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get back to the movie. The next note I had was the kids are like, so the kid that has been hazed is now hanging out with the guys, and let's see, does the McConaughey scene happen before that, where he's talking about him getting older and then everybody else stays the same age?
No, it happens a little bit later. So right after the hazing stuff, they're all cruising around, right? They're like going to the drive-in, burger joint, or they're at the pool hall, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I had the smashing mailboxes. I think that was later though, right?
Yeah, that's later as well. So here's this area is where they're like cruising, you know, and I know when we were growing up, it was kind of a thing, and we might have done it once or twice, but all these cities put these no cruising ordinances, so there's all these signs up that said, do not drive past the sign more than, twice in a half an hour or something ridiculous. Like they try to outlaw cruising.
Whoa, really?
Oh, yeah.
Holy cow, that's crazy. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, back when it was a thing. I don't think kids do it so much these days because we have like smartphones and other forms of entertainment. But yeah, back then that's how you hung out with your friends and sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like, exercising, flexing that freedom. You've got a license to drive a car, and that was back when you could have young people in the car with you. Where we are now, Washington State, it's like a graduated license structure now. So you have a permit for a while, and then you can drive just by yourself or with a parent for a while. Like you can't have anyone under the age of 18 in your car for like a year or two, something ridiculous like that.
Oh my God! Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, so it totally shuts down the whole cruising thing. And we're from a small town, and so we'd actually go to a medium-sized town that had like one main drag. One of them was called Marysville, the other one was called Mount Vernon, and they both had these no cruising ordinances as a result of all of this.
Wow.
But
that's crazy.
One of the things they talked about when they were cruising in the film was the car with the intellectuals. The one guy, I think his name's Mike, he said that he had wanted to be an ACLU lawyer to like stand up for the little guy and fight for justice. The standard SJW stuff. But then he starts, waxing philosophical about how he actually doesn't like people, and he wouldn't want to actually help the people that he would, be trained to help or whatever. Like he's standing in line at the post office, and like everyone's disgusting, and he actually hates people. And so now he's just honest about being a misanthrope. And I think that sort of plays into what attracts people to positions of government or like social justice. It's like the first layer is, oh, you're doing a good thing, you're helping people, but the surface level stuff is, well, you're depending on theft for funds, and you're in the bureaucratic process, and it's so you can like lord it over people. Like if O'Banion became a cop or this guy became an ACLU lawyer, all that kind of stuff. Like it is actually like for their own individual benefit, but it has this sort of like panache to it, this cover story that makes it sound benevolent or a good thing.
Yeah, that's how people are attracted to being a politician and whatnot, because it's almost venerated in this world for some reason. You see it all the time in movies where people will talk about how they are public servants and not like public leeches.
Yeah.
Because it's far better to think about yourself as the hero in the story, right? Not as like a bad person doing bad things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting because a lot of the characters in Dazed and Confused have like they're well, as the title so aptly suggests, they are confused. I mean, they're teenagers. They don't know who they are and who they want to be, and they're trying to figure all this stuff out. And they're doing it all under the guise of this in this prison that they've been in, and as this takes place on the last day of school as they escape and they're back into the free world and they're exploring all the possibilities that exist. But their whole lives, our whole lives were shoved into these schools, these compulsory education institutions, and we're shown this kind of machine-like model of the world where it's just like regurgitating information. A teacher stands in class and she's very, authoritarian. Everything's authoritarian. And so, maybe it's like a way for Mike to get back at people a little bit. Like, hey, I was screwed over. I was put in this authoritarian indoctrination system. Now I'm gonna, take out have my vengeance or whatever, something like that.
Yeah, I know Robert and I, to speak for you, Robert, even though you're right here, we were not big fans of schooling, and I did whatever I could to minimize the amount of schooling I had towards the end of my high school career. On an official level. Robert did it more on a go his own way kind of level. But, you think about school, like, yeah, you need to raise your hand for permission. You got to have a hall pass just to be in the hallway. I remember, back in junior high, when, like, say you'd have a cold or something in the winter and you'd cough up something in your mouth, I'd hold on to it for like 20 minutes because I couldn't, leave like we were taking a test or whatever. And it's that kind of shit, like you can't even go to the bathroom without permission. You can't even go and spit in the sink without permission. And it's just that level of control. And they always say that schooling doesn't properly prepare you for society, but I think in a sense it does. Like it prepares you to have an authoritarian figure to which you need to run to for approval to do anything.
Right. Yes. That's it. You hit the nail right on the head. They set the tone from an early age. It's like people always say it's good to learn a language when you're a kid. Well, it's good to learn anything when you're a kid. So the younger that you can get them and the younger you can start kind of brainwashing them into a system of control. And, everybody knows that the education system was built off of the Prussian, model for training soldiers. So it has this kind of, cookie cutter mentality, authoritarian structure, obedience training, it narrows the range of options it narrows your perception of the world and it limits your range of options. And at least this is the case for public, government funded schools, the worst ones. So, yeah. I think I see the school as being a major factor in a lot of, what happens in the movie, a lot of the choices, a lot of the decisions that people make, a lot of the actions that the people take in the movie. Yeah.
Right. And it's the backlash that the kids are fighting against, right? Because now they get out of school and then they just flex their freedom.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And you're going to make mistakes. And they do. These kids, they do make some mistakes in this movie. The next scene I wanted to talk about was the main kid character who was assaulted in the after the baseball game. He's now driving around with a couple other kids, and they are just like letting off steam, celebrating their freedom. And what do is they decide to steal some garbage cans and then smash mailboxes. And I kind of took this scene as kind of like a more innocent, like a more kind of like, or at least not self-aware scene of like a mafia scene where you got a couple of guys driving around doing whatever, committing crimes. And then they're like, hey, take this bowling ball and throw it in a window. Like you need to take part in this so that you are complicit, so you're not going to like rat on us. Just as a way to, kind of absolve themselves or at least make sure that they're not going to get in trouble. But of course what does happen is they stop at a convenience store for some more beer, and one of the homeowners comes with a gun to kind of make sure that these kids, pay for what they did. He says that, he's called the cops and, not to move, not to take off. Now, I know, Daniel, you might have an issue with the proportionality of this, but was that the only problem you had? Do you think he was well within his rights to kind of track down some sort of a justice for himself? Or do you think he was completely out of line, this homeowner?
Well, to your point earlier where O'Banion was assaulting the two kids on the front line and the lady comes out with a shotgun, there is a differential in power there. So even though she was bringing a lethal weapon to the defense of another, if she didn't have it, then she would have been at a disadvantage. So I think in that case it was appropriate upon further reflection. In this case, it's really hard to say what would be the de facto, correct thing to do in Anarcho-capitalism society, a proprietarian society, because it's really up to the person who's violated to determine what the satisfaction is going to be, and certain societal norms will sort of coalesce together and become like the de facto what you do. I'm not sure exactly what that would be here, but here's a guy who's upset his property's been destroyed. It might have been his mailbox or it might have been his car that had the bowling ball through it. I don't recall. But if you're going to approach somebody, a group of four, young people in the prime of their lives who have just displayed a penchant for property destruction and you could expect some violence, like these Antifa people, I don't think it's out of line to have some form of defensive capacity with you when you do confront them. I think shooting at them when they're trying to escape was probably crossing a line because you're, essentially attempting to murder them for trying to escape. So I think that's where he crossed the line. But I think having a gun with him to confront them is probably okay.
But what he first did was he pulled the gun and stuck it in their face, which is a threatening, like I'm going to kill you kind of a thing. I mean, if he had just had the gun on him, sure, that's one thing. And to just go and confront the people and, hey, you destroyed my property. Hey, I'm looking for some justice here. You either need to pay for it or whatever. But when he raised the gun, I mean, in basic handgun firearm safety, you don't point any gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. And if someone's pointing a gun at you, you can safely defend yourself as if you are about to be murdered. So, I mean, it gets all kinds of messy, but in my mind, he crossed the line when he pointed the gun at the kids.
I will amend my previous statement and agree with you there. Yeah, pointing the gun at them is sufficient to be over the line. Though I'm not sure at what point, what he could have done to make sure he has their attention. I'm sure that's what the attempt was. I don't think he was really going to shoot them, sort of like the O'Banion wasn't going to kill those kids, or at least not consciously, like he intended to only hit them with that stick, not murder them with the stick. Of course, anything could happen. But at the same token, I don't think that this guy intended to point the firearm and fire the weapon. I don't think that he...
You're right. He just wanted them to take him seriously. But how do they know? Some guy comes out of the night. You've had a few drinks. You're feeling good. All of a sudden, some guy comes out of the night sticking a gun in your face. What are you supposed to think?
Well, Mike, you're in New York. This probably happens to you every other day. What's your thought on this?
So actually, I have experience with this because I have done this. Me and my friends, when we were in, I think, freshmen in high school, we knocked over some mailboxes. And that's what they were doing. They were knocking over mailboxes. And I think we probably watched Dazed and Confused, and we were like, let's go do that. But I found it to be really interesting what he says when he points the gun at them. He says, tampering with mailboxes is a federal offense. And so it's just like, in his mind, it's like, this is the ultimate. He says it like, like it's a federal offense, boys. Like, do you know what kind of trouble you're in? So the state looms large, in this man's mind. And he's like, he's called the police. This is going to be a big, bust. These kids are going to pay for the damage. And yeah, I have no problem with somebody, protecting their property, but I do agree with you guys. Sticking it in their face is a little much. And then he does shoot at them, which is like, what if you murdered one of those kids? That wouldn't be just restitution for a mailbox thing. And then I'll just add to that I think that why are these kids smashing mailboxes and stuff like that? Why did I do that when I was in high school? I think it's like a large part of it, again, going back to being in school, being in this controlled state environment. A large part of also being in school is kind of almost like you're in a woman-controlled world. A lot of my teachers were female, from kindergarten to high school. I think majority of teachers are female in the United States. And there's this kind of nanny thing that happens, and young boys are told to, behave, sit in their seats and sit in their chairs, and if they act out of line, maybe there's something mentally wrong with them and they need to be medicated with something or whatever. But I think a lot of it is like, these kids are acting out because I think in an Anarcho-capitalism, in our perfect world, kids, we wouldn't have punk kids like this because kids would be, they'd be able to get their male aggression out a little bit earlier in a proper setting, not in this kind of violent retribution way. But anyway, that's my extra added 2 cents on that piece.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think that in Anarcho-capitalism, kids this age would actually be out being productive rather than destructive because they wouldn't have this near adult daycare system that they were beholden to going to.
Right, I
just
agree.
Throw a little bit of personal stuff at you on our end. We also had our share with the mailboxes, and I don't know if it was related to this film or not. I just thought it was because we were, young kids out to cause trouble, but we did the whole M80 thing in some mailboxes. But we were trying to be good about it. Like, we didn't do it to strangers, we did it to people that we knew.
Even better.
We figured if we got in trouble, at least it'd be someone we know, and we could, replace their mailbox, which we ended up having to do because we got busted by the cops.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's obviously this genetically, biologically ingrained thing in men that boys that they need to be somewhat aggressive in some way. They need to cause some kind of trouble in some way. And I don't know. I always saw it as like, well, if I knock down the mailbox, it's government property, so that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah.
So Robert, before you go on, I wanted to just bring up one thing. The high school is Lee High School, and that's kind of a thing in the news now, right? Like, all these Confederate statues are being taken down in southern states, like in Louisiana and Georgia and things like that, and it's become this big deal to essentially erase the history, very Orwellian, and only focus on the quote-unquote good guys, right? The Union guys. Like, they're not going to take that in the Lincoln Memorial, even though he's responsible for 600,000 deaths. And, they always say, if you don't like it, you can leave. Well, Lincoln wouldn't let you. So they're going to let, Union statues stand, but not Confederate. And, this was Lee High School. What would it be called today? High School McSchooly or Schooly McSchooly High? Something like that?
Yeah, I mean, not to get into like the whole slavery thing, but the War of Secession, as it was called in the South, very much just an Anarcho-capitalism or a libertarian type of value. It was the right to free association, right? Whereas Lincoln was like, no, we're going to start a war and we're going to murder you if you try and secede. These symbols of the Confederacy are seen as now, they've been so demonized that they're seen as like hate symbols. So the Confederate statue, that's what it's called in the media, is that they're hate symbols. And I guess Richard Spencer led some kind of torchlight protest. And since they use torches, that's seen as like racist and hate. And just everything gets branded as hate these days in the media. And from my perspective, it's like really dumb to just blame it, say hate, as if they don't have legitimate concerns. It's a really way to just ignore or to demonize your opponent. It's a real ad hom kind of thing, as opposed to actually talking about, well, what are their actual grievances? What are they actually saying? It's just a way to not understand your opponent. And, it's just more divisive. And, it's like this is totally an aside, but, I live in like socialism capital of the planet, apparently. And I was chatting with line with a lady, and we're going back and forth with all this conversation. It's just perfectly fine and innocuous. We're talking about movies. We're talking about whatever. And then she asked me, what my last good book I read was. And I wrote back, we had discussed, like, we didn't really want to talk politics and religion and that sort of thing because those things can be a bit divisive. But she asked me what my last good book I read was, and I had to be honest. And so I said Atlas Shrugged, and then crickets. I'm not going to just talk to you anymore. This is clearly a terrible person that likes Atlas Shrugged. So probably because it's seen as like hate or something like that, when I think they just don't understand it. But there's a whole lot of misinformation out there when you don't try and understand what the other people are saying. You just assume that they're bad people. And these SJWs, they just assume that if you have an in-group preference, that you're some sort of a racist and that racism is just the absolute worst thing in the world, when everybody has preferences. Everybody has preferences about everything all the time.
All day long.
And equality is the antithesis of freedom. Because all you can do to enforce equality is through violence, and it's just a really shitty situation.
All you can do is handicap the gifted, right, to make them equal with everyone else. So it's an equality of misery. which is sort of how the education system works. Like they can only teach to the lowest common denominator, right? So the excellent students, the smart ones, the driven ones, it'll be that drive to learn will, wear out. Like it'll be driven out of them, which is kind of another unfortunate thing. But back to your comment about Atlas Shrugged being a hate symbol and this girl being kind of turned off by it. We were looking at a house the other day with the real estate agent, and across the street was a house with a Confederate flag on it. And she made some comment about, I don't know about this neighborhood. People across the street might be a little not your cup of tea. And she's not an SJW as far as I can tell. She's just somebody who's like probably watches the 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, whatever. And now the Confederate flag is considered a hate symbol, and she's taken that bait, hook, line, and sinker.
Right, as if the Confederate flag, as if everybody in the South was a member of the KKK. That's essentially what they've reduced that symbol to.
Or anyone who voted for Trump now is KKK, right? Like they call Trump voters, they only voted for him because of hate, because of racism.
Right. Well, if you listen to what Hillary Clinton says.
Yeah. Now I'll agree, but I would say that anyone who voted at all was voting for hate, hate for the other side, hate for their fellow man, wanting to violently control and domineer over others through a convenient mechanism that is nearly costless to them as far as like the individual costs of their actions. I consider voting to be a violent act, and with a very small caveat for possible defensive voting if you're saying no to an increase or an additional regulation of some sort. But anytime you're voting for an individual who just wants to make more rules and more regulations and more taxes on you, but just for your own preferences, and then it's enforced upon everyone else, that's a violent act.
Sure, yeah. And be careful what you wish for when you vote for some violent thing. Every time you vote for some law against, to be used against your neighbor, it's only a matter of time before it's used against yourself. So that's a real short-sighted approach.
Well, all the Hillary supporters got a flavor of that. I mean, they cheered every time Obama took a step beyond what Congress would allow or executive orders that he said he wouldn't do. And now all this power has coalesced into the executive. And now that Trump has it, they're scared to death. They're like, oh my God, he has so much power. What are we going to do? It's the end of the world. He's going to turn back the clock on civil rights, and gay people are going to be put into camps and all that stuff. When, the last time people were put into camps, it was one of their heroes. It was FDR putting people in camps because they were born somewhere else.
Yeah, that always gets overlooked, right? It's like so funny. It's just that things can be, you can selectively just pick things through history and just make them fit your narrative however you want it to fit in whatever way, and come up with any kind of rationalization, apology for anything. And then as time passes on, then people who were like Lincoln, like I think I'm correct when I think there's a picture of Lincoln in the high school where he has bloodshot eyes. I don't know if that's Lincoln or not, but it's someone that they drew bloodshot eyes on. It looked like Lincoln, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous how this mythology takes place. Real actual facts just become something that fits some kind of ideology. And I thought it was interesting, like when didn't Trump recently say something like the Civil War, like how come they couldn't get along or whatever? And then everybody was like, obviously there was, because of slavery, that was like the big response, like, oh, can you believe what Trump said? But I remember hearing that and just being like, yeah, I mean, why couldn't they get along? Maybe Lincoln was a dick. Maybe that's why,
Not their God, Lincoln. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Trump got shit for that. They were saying a fourth grader could have answered that question, but only because the fourth grader had been indoctrinated for a few years already. But yeah, I think Trump had a point. It could have been avoided. Every other civilized country abolished slavery without violence. Why couldn't it have happened here? He made some reference to Andrew Jackson. If Andrew Jackson had been around, that it may have been avoided because he was against this kind of thing. And they made fun of the fact that Jackson had died like 15 years before. But that's sort of beside the point. Like Jackson, he wasn't like the greatest guy around, but he did shut down the central bank. He was Jacksonian, like his line of thinking was near libertarian. Murray Rothbard talks about this in several of his lectures, and he would have, I think, permitted or been okay with the states leaving. Like they formed a union voluntarily, they should be able to leave the union voluntarily. And it was only Lincoln saying, no, you can't do that, and I'm going to murder you if you try, that it became a civil war. It became this issue that totally could have been avoided.
Yeah, and still one of these topics to this very day that's just, if you even suggest secession, that it's like, well, I guess now it's actually becoming a little bit more back into the fray with Trump being president and now all the lefties being like, oh, what about secession? But, it's still this touchy subject where it's, people view, one centralized government unifying everybody to be something, in terms of, to be like, considered to be good for some strange reason when decentralizing and seceding is looked at as bad. I don't know. It really hurts my mind to to contemplate why people think that.
Yeah, the media really did do a number when Brexit was happening. Well, first they were like, well, it's not going to happen, don't worry about it. But then when it did happen, they're like, oh my God, everybody in Great Britain is a racist, homophobe, whatever, as if wanting to secede and, associate with who you want to associate, not associate with other people, not be beholden to other people's rule is somehow this evil thing, and you're not working together and being one big kumbaya, happy one world government type thing, when it's really just people choosing to associate with who they want to associate.
Right.
But they will demonize that to the ends of the earth, apparently, and say that you're a racist for not wanting to be part of this one giant big group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what's the next scene up for bid, Robert?
I don't really have a whole lot left. We've covered most of it. The last thing that I thought was kind of funny, well, there's a couple of them, but they go to this party. It's a moon tower, and the kind of intellectual guy, as he's walking by some like angry drunk guys, and the angry drunk guy kind of starts picking a fight with him, as if he took umbrage with something that he said, some kind of comment like, oh, somebody's smoking some reefer around here. And he's like, yeah, I smoke weed, so what? You angry about that or something? And then there's a bit of a confrontation. And then, so the intellectual guy, he kind of like feels emasculated, and he won't let it go. He won't let it go. And he feels like he needs to react and respond to this like affront to kind of prove his manhood. And so what he does is he goes and dumps a beer on the guy's head, and then he sucker punches him. And then there's kind of like a fight. I don't see kind of anybody acting morally in this situation. I don't think there are any good guys. I don't know. Do either of you see it differently? Daniel, Mike?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just that particular scene to me is like so, I think, typical of the high school kind of bully experience or whatever. It's like the title suggests, they're confused. There's all this like, do I need to, the macho guy who says, yeah, I'm smoking some weed, you got a problem with it? He's taking on a role where he feels like he needs to assert force. He needs to be the tough guy. He has to be the alpha, male in the situation. And then the other guy feels like, well, I don't know, should I let it slide? Should I not let it slide? And then ultimately he decides not to, and does something about it. But yeah, I think they're both, it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, who started it or whatever, two wrongs don't make a right, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's just, a big mess, a big teenage mess of, fists and confusion.
Yeah, these really are not quite adult people, kind of like making mistakes and learning life and living it. And they've been in this nanny state indoctrination center their whole lives, being raised by women and being taught by women. And they're not really able to let out their testosterone-fueled aggression and in a kind of a healthy, positive way. And maybe they're reacting to some kind of perceived slight where they're finally able to react to a perceived slight, as opposed to all these slights that they just have to sit and take. Like every time someone's telling you not to do something that you want to do, just for the fact that they're establishing dominance and exposing, using some sort of so-called authority over you, which is really just a threat. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to attack you. And so finally they're able to react and blow off some steam, and they make a mess of it. So I don't think anybody's a hero in this scene, but I also don't, necessarily blame them too much either. Daniel, what do you think about that?
Oh, I totally blame the bully guy. It wasn't a perceived slight, it was a contrived slight. Like he made it a big deal, and he made it a thing to go after this weaker guy about. If it was one of the other like football guys, he wouldn't have said shit. So he was doing it to assert his dominance over a weaker person, like a true bully. And I think that he was inappropriate, totally in the wrong, and that the Mike character, he shouldn't have sucker punched him, but who's to say what the proper recompense would be for someone? Because I would consider what the first guy did to be an aggression, right? He does push him, he does threaten to beat him up, and it's only because he backs away and there's like two other people with him that he even gets out of that situation to begin with. And again, they are kids and they are confused and they are stuck in this system that has them bottled up all day long, for 9 months out of the year. So I think that, it's not outside of the realm of reasoning why this guy would want to, assert his dominance, be that pack animal kind of deal. But I still think it was inappropriate for him to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely inappropriate for him to do it for sure. I forgot that he pushed him. I think he pushes him to the ground. I forgot about that. He does that, but and he's like one of these people that just goes. He's so aggressive that it's one of those people that you go, wow, there must be something really wrong with you to get this aggressive about it. And it's like there's all these interesting little groups of people in the movie Dazed Confused, and I think it reflects the high school experience in a true way, where all the different cliques, the jocks, the bullies, the stoners, the intellectual people. And it's funny because it's like you were saying, they're bottled up all year. It is really like they're in prison, and you have all these little gangs, quote unquote gangs of prison, and they go to war with each other. And that's kind of how it is. So yeah, I agree. That guy was being a dick.
And I like how the Mike guy described it and said he was a super dominant male in a 50s greaser uniform.
Yeah.
So hey, I know we're getting close to the end here. I have a hard stop in like 20 minutes, but we haven't even talked about the Matthew McConaughey character very briefly, and then the Parker Posey character, who is crazy, right? She's the one put the girls through the ringer, and at the kegger, she even tells that freshman girl like air raid, why aren't you dropping to the ground, freshman? And she is like just nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. Although, she does promise to like make her life a living hell after she doesn't do that. And she is, you're going around bullying people and threatening them. But I didn't get the idea or the sense that she was going to physically assault her. Did you get that sense, Daniel? Maybe.
Well, it's hard to say if she'd even remember it the next day. I mean, she was stumbling around, but she does make threats at the end to make her life living hell. That could involve violence, perhaps. But as an interesting side note, in the wiki it says that Renee Zellweger was thought of for that role, but she just didn't have that same craziness to her, so Parker Posey got that role, and Renee was elsewhere in the film as like a non-speaking part. But speaking of performances, I want to talk about McConaughey because every line he says is like gold. I mean, he just plays it so laid back, so cool. And it brings up the whole, I think you mentioned it earlier, Robert, I get older and they stay the same age. So it's like that whole age of consent thing, and like he's super creepy and gross. You want to talk about that a little bit, and then we can start to wind the show down?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of things to say other than it's a huge kind of a gray area. I mean, the older he gets, the creepier it gets. But could you argue that people in high school are of the age of consent to engage in any kind of activity that they desire? They haven't declared independence necessarily from their parents yet. So they haven't said that, hey, I'm a full adult human being, I'm going to take care of myself, I'm going to make all my own decisions. But they also, mean, it's hard to. It's a gray area for me. I'll just put it at that. Mike, is it a gray area for you?
I don't know. I see it. I mean, like, yeah. Like, how old is he? We don't really know. He seems like. I guess he seems like a guy who's in or who was in college but dropped out. So maybe he's 22 or 23. I mean, yeah. But also, it's like back then. You know, you had to be 18 years old. 18 years old was the drinking age. So you could buy beer when you're 18. So you know, it just seemed that there was a little bit more of a leniency with that sort of thing. And they're in Texas, so I don't know what the you know, the laws on the books there are in Texas. But aside from those kinds of laws, there seems to be aside from the state laws, there seems to be like a general agreement between the boys, the high school boys and everybody, that Matthew McConaughey's presence there is generally accepted. They don't really think that he's like disgusting or creepy, that I guess that what he's doing is okay, and they get along with him, and it seems to be something accepted. You know, in like an Anarcho-capitalism state, like if there was some creepy guy who was coming and preying on little girls, and a group of people decided that this was not a good thing, then I think that they would make that known. But I don't think they make that known. I think it's welcomed, and he's kind of seen as almost like somewhat of a quasi kind of hero kind of guy to them, to the high school kids, right?
Yeah, all the girls are into him for sure.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
He's like, you know, tapping them all on the butt and everything. And I know today they'd get in trouble for that, but to your point, you know, if it wasn't welcome in that community of individuals, then he would be physically removed, so to speak.
Yeah.
To quote the Triple H on Herman Hoppa.
Right. Yes. Yeah. He would. Yeah. There would have to be some kind of physical removal if he was violating the social norms and agreements of the age of consent that everybody has come to agree upon what is appropriate and whatnot. And I'm kind of like, I remember being in high school and I remember dating a girl that was younger than that. Like she was a freshman and I was a senior. And I think I don't know if it was like technically quote unquote like what the state determined is legal. But nobody saw it as like a problem, you know. Nobody was like, "Oh, this guy's way too creepy," you know, or something like that, you know. I mean, I guess I was still in high school, so it's a little different, but yeah, I mean, McConaughey's character, just on a side note, his character in that movie is awesome, and I love the scene where he's talking to the guy, to the 50s greaser uniform guy that we were just talking about. He's talking to him about their muscle cars, and they're like exchanging, like that was like a thing that a lot of people did back then, which I don't really see too much of that happening now, but they were like investing in putting different kinds of parts in their cars, and they were talking about how they were kind of building their cars and stuff. That was kind of a cool scene. Yeah,
when we were in high school, it was all about your stereo system and subwoofers and junk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I had an almost identical situation, Mike. I was a senior dating a freshman, and she had a mother who took to calling the cops a lot. So there were several situations where it was like 2 a.m. and I get a phone call from the cops, or like 5 o'clock in the morning and then they're knocking on the front door and talking about how it'd be illegal and statutory or whatever, like a rape situation. And I remember I got out of it by saying, well, only if you're having sex, right? Because I knew it would only be getting caught, I guess you could say, if she, you know, claimed that we were doing anything.
Yeah.
But
damn, man, that's fucking badass. You're having the cops called on you. You're like a rebel without a cause. You're like jumping out of windows and having the cops run after you. Yeah, you'd fit right in with this movie, Dazed and Confused here. Yeah.
Well, the cops in my hometown weren't the super smartest. Like I remember one time they called at like 2 a.m, and I just picked up the phone and I was sitting there listening. I didn't say hello. And on the cops on the other line were like, it just stopped ringing. I don't know what's happening. And I'm sitting there listening and just kind of laughing to myself before I just hung up, and then that was it. But then they showed up the next morning and like, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. The cops. Yeah.
One of the last scenes I wanted to mention before we wrap this thing up was the kids are all just chilling on the football field, and they're just kind of hanging out. They're drinking a few beers, just having a good time, being peaceful. And then the cops show up, and one of them starts, they're like, what are you doing? And they're clearly just sitting there, being peaceful. And then they start barking orders, and so then the people kind of meekly go over there. And then the cops, because this is what cops do, they act like you're the worst person in the world and you're doing something horrible, all of a sudden start acting like hanging out on a football field is the crime of the century, and how dare you do this? I can't believe you're doing this. I'm going to call your coach, and the coach is going to act like you're doing something terrible. At that point, they don't have anything on these kids that they had done all night long. So, but they have to feel like they need to justify their behavior by claiming that the kids were doing something terrible. I don't know. I saw that as a really typical of a police move where you're doing something completely innocuous. And so the cop has to escalate it and act like, oh my God, now what are you doing? I've got to do all this and treat you like you're a criminal and whatever. And when they're really just lording over this authority, I was just really disgusted.
Yeah, that's the Larkin Rose point, right? Like, cops are always trained to escalate to get compliance. Though I would quibble with you on whether they were doing anything wrong. You could argue that property is private property. Now, of course, it's the school and it's the state, and is that legitimate ownership? But they do claim to own it, and so you could say that they were violating that property.
I wouldn't. That is public property.
Yeah, public school, right?
Trespass. Yeah, it's a public school. This is where they go to school. I mean, yeah, there are certain hours of operation for this property, but when you're a part owner of a thing, how can you say to be trespassing on it?
Right. Yeah, I think they would impose those rules, but those rules wouldn't necessarily make sense if that school is a part of the public community funded taxpayer dollars are going to fund this prison that they call school.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that they would try and enforce it, but I don't think they would be logically correct in doing so. Yeah.
Though I bet if one of us were to walk into some random school or be on school property and we didn't have a kid there, we would be removed. Cops would be involved. So, even though I may have paid for a portion of that school, it goes back to the, if everyone owns it, nobody owns it.
Right.
Argument. So, I don't know. I mean, yeah, school's a prison and it's stupid, but I think that the people who claim to own it would have an argument that, hey, you're there not when you're supposed to be, yada, yada.
Sure, of course. I mean, there's always if somebody were to get injured, the liability thing and that, to take place. So there's always that argument to be had as well. Yeah.
Well, and this slides right into...
Real quickly... go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I wanted to bring up... Pink finally decides to not sign that paper and throws it at the coach. And it's sort of like the closing of his arc to say, no, I'm going to be an individual. I'm going to stick to, I might play, but I'm not going to play under these rules. And I think that the point of the film was to say that, that's a good thing. He's being rebellious. He's sticking to his principles. And I tend to agree with that. Like my comment earlier, he had already been playing on this team for several years, and sure, they're trying to impose this new agreement, but he, in a negotiation, can say no, and then they can decide whether they still want him to play or not. So I think that's kind of where it ends.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Not to completely go off, but we only have a few more minutes, and I really wanted to talk a little bit about if anybody had an issue with all the intoxication while driving that these kids are doing. They're all just driving around drunk or stoned or whatever. Now, for me, there can't be a crime unless there's a victim. And maybe but when they're driving around like erratically, you could say that, you're kind of endangering other people. And that might be kind of a punishable offense in some sense. But I just wanted to get your guys' take on all that of what's going on. I mean, in a private situation, I'm sure each road owner would be able to decide how much of an intoxication level they'd allow, and they'd advertise that. And hey, if you could drive on this road at 1.5, who cares? And maybe more people would drive on that, or fewer people would drive on that. But you'd cater to different parts of the market. But this is a public situation, and So I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that real quick before we wrap this up.
Well, hey, before we do that, I can leave the call going and just mute myself if you guys want to just continue on. And Robert, you can feel free to wind the show down. I just have to be on a work call for 20 minutes or something. So if you guys have more to talk about, feel free to continue on. I'll just cut this bit out. I don't want to miss out on anything. And I did want to bring up the whole the name of the film, Dazed and Confused, is of course a Led Zeppelin song. And they wanted the rights to be able to use the song in the film, and they didn't get the rights to use the song, but they did get the rights for the name, I guess, and so it's a whole intellectual property thing. That might be a good point to go over. So you guys want to just keep going on, and I'll just mute myself?
I think it's been a good episode. I don't know, what do you think, Mike? You probably need to get going to your dinner.
Yeah, I do actually, and I was going to say, I think this has been a great episode. I really enjoyed the conversation. I guess maybe just some finishing thoughts or closing points, and then we can cap it off. I feel good about this.
Sweet, let's do that, Daniel. Can you give us a few more minutes and just wrap it up?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, let's go ahead. Who wants to go first?
Oh yeah, so I'll just say I think that. Just to kind of cap it off and give a broad overview of the movie and how it represents anarchy and I think that it's a really, really interesting film. It takes place 1776, the bicentennial. There's so many underlying tones of state aggression and authority that are in the movie, and we see it in all forms with the parents, the coaches, the teachers, the cops. Everybody is trying to get these kids to conform, and they're trying to impose rules and regulations on them. And I see the whole movie as this kind of anarchist kind of rebellion to the status quo. And I liked what Daniel said before about how Pink's choice was he's not going to play under those rules. He wants to play, but he's not going to do it under those rules. So it's either take it or leave it. You can either have me as the quarterback, or I'm just not going to play at all. And I like that mentality because that's a really individualist mentality, and that's the kind of mentality that actually moves the needle and gets things to be changed. If people don't conform and they challenge the status quo and they stand up for what they believe in. So I really, really like those elements of the film, and I like the kids kind of rebelling against the authoritarian system of control that's present all around them. And also to keep in mind, these are kids, and they're learning about how the quote unquote real world works. So it's a good representation of what are we showing them and how are they responding to it, and how could it be different if maybe certain kinds of rules were changed and things weren't like that. So overall, great film. And a lot to dissect in there, and really enjoyed this.
Very cool. Yeah, to your point, peaceful noncompliance really, really changes things. I mean, you got your main character, Pink Floyd guy, just deciding to, not go along with the system so much. And if more people just decided to withdraw their support, there's all these. You got to take part in the political process, and that's how change happens. If 20% of the people of the tax-paying public just stopped paying, the whole system would just fall apart. I mean, you just got to withdraw your support from the dictator to have him just fall over on his own accord. You don't necessarily have to have some sort of an armed uprising. You just walk away, and you just voluntarily associate with who you want to voluntarily associate with. And, this movie was quite excellent. I really did enjoy it. There very much is an anarchist kind of a spirit throughout an individualistic approach. And, that's what the podcast is about. It's about finding anarchy in pop culture and that sort of thing. And it really does. Anytime you're voluntarily associating with someone and you're deciding to peacefully cooperate, you are acting as an anarchist. And there's definitely these are kids. They're making some mistakes. They're blowing off some steam. They're reacting to this violent system that we are all subjugated with, but they're doing the best they can, and it's a nice little slice of life all about the same year I was born. So that was fun too. Daniel, your closing thoughts?
I'll just refer back to my previous hour and a half of conversation because I do need to jump off. But Mike, I do appreciate you coming on. You've got your show, Mikeadelic. You're no longer part of the problem. You are the problem. So we'll be putting a link to that down below. I do recommend that people check it out. And I'm also going to include a link to that mental illness illness awareness month because I think it was relevant to our conversation and you go a little bit deeper into it. But listeners, thank you for associating with us on a voluntary basis. We have been the Actual Anarchy podcast talking about Dazed and Confused with Mikeadelic himself. Do click on any of the Amazon links on our website. We do appreciate that. And come back to us next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. We'll be doing another episode. And maybe Bat might be a hint. Maybe that won't be the next one, but maybe another one in the future. And Robert, why don't you go ahead and sign us out here, buddy?
I just want to thank everybody for listening. I'm at Trubster on Twitter and Actual Anarchy on Twitter. Like us on Facebook. Review the podcast. Do whatever you want to do. Voluntarily, of course, if you appreciate the conversation. Maybe throw in a few shekels. Keep us going. But we're going to keep doing it anyway. I mean, we just love this shit. So be free, my babies, and I love you all. Take care. The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.